Ed and David Miliband shared their father's fascination with politics, even if their brand of socialism wasn't as hardline as his. Ralph Miliband was a well-known Marxist academic, but Saturday's Daily Mail resurrected comments he'd made as a 17-year-old in his diary to claim he hated Britain. It so incensed the Labour leader he demanded a right of reply. Miliband Sr. was Jewish and had fled his native Belgium ahead of the Nazi invasion. He served in the Royal Navy during the Second World War.
Britain saved his life. It saved his life. And this paper is saying that he hated Britain. And that is a lie. That is a lie.
But the Mail was unrepentant. Alongside Mr. Miliband's defence of his father, the paper republished the original article and an editorial which began, "Red Ed's in a strop with the Mail."
He would have been quite amused at the notion I was Red Ed, because he would have thought it was so far from the truth. Look, he had left-wing views, you know, significantly more left-wing than mine. I have a different vision of this country and the way this country succeeds.
Ralph Miliband died in 1994. We've been asked not to show his headstone, but he's buried here in Highgate Cemetery, not far from the tomb of the man whose ideology he shared. The Labour leader says it's perfectly legitimate for the Mail to question his father's politics, but not his patriotism. But the Mail continued to fight back, saying Ralph Miliband devoted his life to promoting the dogma of Karl Marx. In a statement, the paper said he hated such British institutions as the Queen, the Church and the Army and wanted a workers' revolution. Our readers have a right to know that. But when it comes to sticking up for one's family, the Labour leader is supported by the Prime Minister.
I completely understand. If I was in Ed's position, if someone attacked my father, I would want to also make pretty clear what I feel. You know, there isn't a day when you've lost your dad, there isn't a day that goes by that you don't think of what they meant to you and how much you miss them. And if someone attacked my dad, I'd do the same thing.
The Mail editor Paul Dacre is one of the most bullish newspaper bosses who stoutly defended his paper at the Leveson inquiry.
Our group did not hack phones, and I rather resent your continued insinuation.
And who accuses Mr. Miliband of trying to crush press freedom through regulation.
That's why I think that the Daily Mail had to grant Ed Miliband the right of reply, which they don't normally do. But then, having granted him that, they surrounded the article with yet more attacks on him.
But the row has led critics on social media to recall the Mail's own history, when its then owner, for a time, promoted fascism, just before a young Ralph Miliband was fleeing its march across Europe. Ian Woods, Sky News.
I think you might politely say, you know, it's sort of characteristically robust. I mean, look, it's all a bit of a stretch, to be honest. They've got one thing that he said in a diary as a 17-year-old refugee, which to the effect that the English were the most nationalistic people he'd found, and so on and so on. And of course, as you've pointed out, and there's no secret about this, he was a Marxist, he was quite a radical, and he had lots of views that were critical of aspects of the way that Britain is. He was hardly alone in that, and certainly you go back to 1945, he was in the majority, I guess, of the country in that. So it's not that, in that sense, not so surprising. But look, there are two things it seems to me the Mail are trying to do here. On one hand, you know, the man who hated Britain is a bit of a stretch, but it is all about from father to son. On one hand, they want to say left-wing extremism is so that when Ed Miliband says that he exists in his father's shadow, he believes his father will be immensely proud of what he's doing. Actually, his father may well disagree with quite a lot of his doing. Nevertheless, the Mail take the opportunity to describe Miliband's policies as sinister policies. And in particular, that's the one about reclaiming land from house-building companies, property companies that don't use it. Whether that may be right or wrong, whether it's sinister is perhaps, again, a bit of a stretch. The other thing, of course, the Mail's big line here is about press regulation. And they draw the connection. I can point it out to you. Under Stalin's communism, which it is suggested that Miliband Sr. supported, the press was controlled, freedom of expression was purged, and in terms of the son's legacy, the father's legacy in the person of the son, i.e. Ed, it says, more chillingly, the father's disdain for freedom of expression can be seen in his son's determination to place the British press under statutory control. Next week's Privy Council itself, an arm of the state, will meet to discuss plans following a stitch-up with Hacked Off over late-night pizzas in Mr Miliband's office for what will ultimately be a politically controlled body to oversee what papers are allowed to publish, and the pièce de résistance, if Mrs Miliband Jr., if he crushes the freedom of the press, no doubt his father will be proud of him from beyond the grave, where he lies 12 yards from the remains of Karl Marx. So that's the real point here, I think.
But as has been pointed out in online and in the Twitter sphere, if you go back into history, you can play these both ways. So that, for example, the family, the Rothermere family that still control the Daily Mail, they famously printed an article supporting the black shirts, who were
the black shirts, I think it was.
who were Britain's fascist movement in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So, Graham Allen, when it comes down to it, what did you do in the war, Daddy? We have Ralph Miliband, who took part in the D-Day landings,
Yeah, exactly.
and we have Lord Rothermere, who met Hitler. Who's going to win the Who Loves Britain argument there?
He was on good dining terms with Hitler and Mussolini and supported the black shirts through the 30s when his friends were rounding people up and putting them in camps. So I think getting lessons on patriotism from the Daily Mail as ahead of discussions about so-called press freedom, I think probably we need to take that with a very large pinch of salt.
Where do you think this contretemps between Ed Miliband and the Daily Mail will leave the decision before the Privy Council next week whether to go with the proposals for self-regulation and a royal charter coming from the newspaper industry, or the one that top politicians agreed on, the Conservatives, Liberal Democrats and Labour, for statutory regulation? Which way do you think the Privy Council is going, Graham?
Probably feel that this doesn't go far enough, frankly, and that Ed Miliband may be on the more moderate side of this argument. But we'll see next week.